You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I'm your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 62. In this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Lucinda Berry, who has written several best-selling psychological thrillers. Lucinda Berry's background is as unique as her stories. She is a trauma psychologist and a leading researcher in childhood trauma, living in Los Angeles, California. She uses her clinical experience to create disturbing psychological thrillers that blur the lines between fiction and nonfiction, and she enjoys taking her readers on a journey through the dark recesses of the human psyche. We chat about her background and writing in very dark subject matter and how she pulls that all together and writes such great thrillers. That interview is coming right up. I'd like to remind you to please review and rate this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever it is that you subscribe to the podcast. It really helps me get the word out on this podcast. So if you enjoy it, please take a few seconds of your time to do that. So here's my interview with Lucinda Berry. Lucinda, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Alan. Glad to be here with you.
Tell me a little bit about yourself, please.
Again, I'm Lucinda Berry. Currently, I have 4 published works, Missing Parts, Phantom Limb, Appetite for Innocence, and then most recently, Saving Noah. So I write psychological thrillers, partly because I'm actually a psychologist and I specialize in trauma. I'm based here in LA, working at the National Center for Child Traumatic Stress. Everything that I write is loosely based on real cases and real events.
Can you tell us a little bit about the genre and about your book?
Psychological thrillers are a little bit different than, they fall under the umbrella of, thrillers, mysteries, and suspense. But a true psychological thriller is really character-driven. So it's driven by the character. It's driven by what's going on inside of them versus some of the more like hard-boiled crime fiction where it's very like external, like here's the clues, try and, figure it out and put it together. It's more, like I said, it's more character driven. And my books in particular, all of them, there is a theme of very like disturbing psychological phenomenon that's disturbing for us, even people that work in the field. So each one of the books looks at its core also has one of these like disturbing mental illnesses underlying the theme of the book. So for example, in Phantom Limb, underlying mental health themes are dissociative disorders. And it's all about a girl coming to terms with different holes and gaps in her memory and where those come from and how they get there. And really what happens when they go very, very bad. So what you'll find in a lot of my books is that it takes a mental illness and really gives you like the most extreme version of it.
See, now it would be so difficult for somebody without your background to write a book like that, and so I could see how. I mean, they've been so successful and they're doing so well.
Right.
Yeah. I think it would be pretty impossible to Google your way through through something like that.
Right. I mean, it definitely would. I mean, I think that's why people have been attracted to my books so well is because it really, because of what I do and because of my experience and because of my background, I can get into a person's mental illness and in their head in a way that's much more authentic and real versus somebody that doesn't have that experience. So there's been readers that have called, somebody called them, they're like reading psychological procedurals with like disturbing twists. Because of course it's a psychological thriller and, there's always the twists that are worked in there. But yeah, I mean, definitely, I don't think that I could write about the things that I write about in a way that was realistic if I wasn't coming from the background that I'm coming from.
Are your 4 books, are they standalones or are they like a part of a series?
No, they're all 4 of them are standalones. I get asked a lot, particularly with Appetite for Innocence and Phantom Limb, if there's going to be a sequel. There could be. I mean, there very well could be because there's some unanswered questions or characters that could come back. So there's definitely a possibility with those two. I've thought about writing a sequel to those two, but as of yet, I have not done so.
Well, that's really cool because of, being in the indie forums and that whole world. Everything is like, you have to be serious. You have to write a series. And here you are being so successful with standalones. I think that's so awesome.
It was really interesting too, because when I initially decided to go the self-publishing route, which, now I'm a hybrid because I've, made some other decisions and directions. But initially when I started, I just devoured everything that was out there for people that had been successful in the indie publishing world. And at first I was kind of disheartened because, that's what you hear again and again is write in a series, that's what sells. And so I had to take a lot of that information and figure out what worked and what didn't work in regards to standalones. It was a bit more difficult because some of the conventional wisdom just didn't apply in my case.
Oh, yeah, so it's just grabbing the advice and then kind of taking what you think is going to work for you. And yeah, so kind of it's the whole thing of being an indie too. You can basically do what you want. So that's awesome how you...
Well, and really the first book that I published was Missing Parts, and it never done well as any of the others. And the reason for that is it was sort of my book that I wanted to, it sounds terrible, but it's the book that if I was going to fail, I was like, okay, I'll fail on this. I wanted to figure things out because I knew Phantom Limb and Appetite for Innocence had the potential to be very successful, but I didn't want to lead with those because I knew I'd make a lot of mistakes in the beginning, if that makes any sense. Because I was just learning. And so I wanted to make my mistakes with something else first before I sort of came out with the two that I knew would be very successful.
Have you always wanted to be a writer, even when you were going through all the schooling and all that? Or?
Yeah, I actually, so when I was a little girl, my mom has kept boxes of all of the stories that I would write when I was young. My mom, even when I was little, I've always had a dark, disturbing side to myself. And I still remember there was this one story that I'd written, and I was 9 years old, and my mom still has it. And it's about this young girl who's dying of cancer. The whole story is about her watching her friends play outside her bedroom window, as she's dying. And I remember, my mom saying then, can't you write anything that's happy? Because none of my stories have ever been about they've always just been really, really dark ever since I was young. And, I wrote a lot in undergrad. I never did anything with anything that I wrote. It wasn't until after graduate school, because I actually stopped writing creatively while I was in graduate school, because it was just, I was just buried underneath so much academics that I just didn't even have time. But then, so then it was after that I was really decided I wanted to make a go at actually publishing some of the stuff that I'd written.
And so do you find that the writing the fiction it helps you? Because I can't even imagine what you're dealing, with the job that you have. That's I see horrific things. I've witnessed some of the worst parts of humanity. So yeah, it actually, I have lots of friends that are psychologists, and they're it's weird that you write disturbing psychological things when you see so much in your day to day, but it's different, and then it's more of an escape for me when I write it creatively, because I get to tackle it from a different place than I do professionally. And I get to say, and if I want, fictionally, I can kill off the bad guy, I can't kill off the bad guy in my real work, or I can tie it up in a way that he gets caught and punished. And those are some of the things that unfortunately don't happen a lot in the real world with some of the real world bad guys. An Appetite for, I don't want to give away too much, but an Appetite for Innocence, the bad guy gets caught. And unfortunately, a lot of times in
sex crimes, the bad guy does not get caught. Bad guy goes free. So it's nice to have areas and spaces where the bad guy gets caught.
And have you always been a fan of like thrillers?
I have, yes. I've always, as an adult, I've just always gravitated to the genre. One of the people that I was largely influenced way back was actually Jodi Picoult, because I think that, like myself, she does a really good job of taking complex, really hard, complicated, real life issues and fictionalizing them in a way that makes people think about things differently. And I think that I do that in a very similar way with things that are psychological in nature, is making fictionalized accounts of those sort of real life things that make people think differently about them.
Crime fiction, usually the protagonist is a FBI guy or woman or a police officer. In psychological thrillers, who's usually like the protagonist?
For me, the protagonist in what I write, which is a little bit different, mine tend to be the victim. So mine are like whoever crime, not necessarily crime, but whoever is being acted upon, like whoever is having something happen to them. So like in Phantom Limb, it's one of the sisters. In Appetite for Innocence, it's all told through the two different perspectives of two of the victims. So it's always the victims of something. And then within there, various mental health professionals or social workers or advocates that come into the scene that are always the people that sort of help put the pieces of the psychological puzzle together.
So is that sort of like I remember reading The Girl on the Train. I mean, that's considered a psychological
Correct,
thriller?
Yeah. Like Girl on a Train is a really is a psychological thriller that a lot of people are familiar with. Yeah, and again, all of that journey is sort of like through her eyes. So that story is largely character driven, which is much different than your standard crime fiction. There's not, like with crime fiction, there's not a lot internally with the characters that you're aware of that's going on with them. Whereas with psychological thrillers, almost everything is going on internally with them. It's like their experience, and you are living their experience with them internally. So you're grappling with some of the same issues that they're grappling with, trying to figure things out.
Does any of your personality go into any of your characters at all? I mean, I know you look at the background, obviously, no, but what about it? Anything else?
Definitely, in Appetite for Innocence, there is a victim's advocate once the girls are freed from captivity. There's a victim's advocate that they meet in the hospital that plays a central role in that book of helping them reintegrate, because they've been kidnapped for years, and helping them reintegrate back into society. And definitely that role of the victim's advocate is one that I have played numerous times in real life. So my personality and my work with victims certainly comes through in those instances. In Phantom Limb, a big chunk of the book takes place within a psychiatric facility, an inpatient locked unit. And a lot of those characters are either pieces of me in the professional work that I do with people, or pieces of other professionals that I know and work with closely. So yeah, a big part of like the helping professionals in all of my stories certainly have characteristics of my personality.
I don't even know how much you can say about this, but you recently signed a contract, so you're now officially a hybrid, right?
Yes, I am.
Congrats. Is the next book that you're working on now, is that going to be for under the contract or
yeah?
Actually,
there's one that I will be releasing in about 4 or 5 months. That's not under contract, but then after that, my next 2 books are under contract with Thomas and Mercer.
That's what I was going to ask you too about your process. So you, how many books do you usually publish? Are you like publishing like one a year or more than one? 2016, I just published 1. And then 2017, I published 3. And it looks like that's what I'll do in 2018 as well. And what's your process? Do you do like, do you have like a detailed outline, or do you just start writing?
It's been different for every book. Phantom Limb, was something that was rolling around. It really Phantom Limb took me years to write because the story, again, was based on a really tragic story of a pair of identical twins that I knew in real life that had suffered this huge loss. And the story had been rolling around in my head for years. And I'd written just different pieces and scenes of it while I was in graduate school. By the time I got to a place where I could actually sit down and write it, I had plotted the whole thing out already. Like I knew exactly what was going to happen, when it was going to happen, who it was going to happen to. You know, I knew the beginning, the middle, and the end, all of it. So when I sat down to write it, I had a really detailed outline of what was going to happen. But, you know, Appetite for Innocence was completely different. When I started that book, I didn't outline whatsoever. I just started pounding it out, and I didn't know where it was going to go. I didn't know what was, you know, exactly going to happen. Like I just had, you know, a basic idea of like the general plot, but what was going to happen and how things were going to be tied up at the end, I didn't know. So that one was very, very different. And then Saving Noah, which is the book that just came out in September, that one I did sit down and plot. And actually that one was different too, in that after the rough draft was finished, that book actually changed a lot in some of the things that happened in the plot, whereas my other ones, the plot line and the major events stayed very similar, as well as the ending. But Saving Noah, once the rough draft was there, the story changed a lot in that one.
Do you think, like going forward, is it going to be based project by project, whether or not you outline, or are you going to continue going that way?
No, I think so. Yeah, I think it will be a project by project sort of a deal. Yeah.
Yeah, your covers are so awesome.
Cover Quill did them, by the way. Let me give a plug out to Rena. Cover Quill did all of my covers, and she was amazing to work with. And people comment on my covers all the time. So you need a good cover artist. Cover Quill is. I'll put my plug in there for her.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'll have a link on the show notes if people on the website or whatever. But Cover Quill, okay, cool. Yeah, so going forward, the one you're working on now, you haven't even started it yet.
No, I have started it. So I've started the next one. Oh. Yeah. I've started the next one, and then I have, as part of my contract, I have rough outlines of the second book that I'll be doing with Thomas and Mercer.
The difference between now having a contract, what's the pressure like now that you have deadlines that someone else is expecting, or is that were you putting deadlines on yourself anyway before?
I mean, I was putting deadlines on. Actually, my deadlines are much more stringent than the ones they're putting on me. So I'm like, whoa, this feels really easy, because I drove a much harder schedule on myself than they're going to impose on me. So it's actually, I feel like, whoa, are you sure? This seems too lenient.
Whoa, wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
So you're a tough boss.
Yes, I have a very tough boss. That's for sure.
And so once you're writing, what's the process like? Do you like try to write every day, and do you have like a word count that you try to meet, or how?
I do now. You know, in the last couple of years, yes. Now I try to write every day. It wasn't always like that. But once I got really serious of what I wanted to do, and that I actually wanted to like make a sustainable living at this, I got really serious about it. So yes, I do try and write every day. There's been periods of time where I have given myself word counts that I want to meet every day. A lot of that, the word count stuff, I'll do when I'm in the rough draft phase, when I'm just trying to like pound the story, like the basic parts of the story out and get it out. I don't do, once it's out and I'm in like the rewriting and the revision part, I don't give myself word counts just because I'm more concerned with the quality of the writing at that point than I am the quantity.
What do you use to write? Do you use like Word, or use a software?
I use Word. Yeah, I use Word. And I use Word, and I use a dinosaur laptop because I love it, and I've been writing on it for years. In fact, I tried to get a new laptop this Christmas, and I returned like 3 of them before I was like, I'm just sticking with my dinosaur because I've just been writing on it forever, so I'm just sticking with it till it dies.
Yeah, that's great. Well, yeah, so it's what works. What is it? George R. R. Martin writes in DOS still.
Yeah, and I completely get it.
And so now your books have been doing so well. What was your plan, like on a business side, like a big marketing plan, or did you just sort of publish them and see what kind of let them loose, or how did that work?
With Missing Parts, it was the first one that I did. I figured out how to do everything with it, right? And so it was like my guinea pig. I did a lot of things wrong with it, and I'm glad that I had it prior to releasing my other ones, because I figured out, I figured out so many things through that. Like, I figured out the importance of reviews. I figured out about the importance of like having a newsletter and like having links to it in the back and how to do that. The importance of a cover. Like, that book, I actually went through 4 different covers before I had a cover that sold. Because my first cover was like this super artsy, looked really cool cover. It was a beautiful cover, but it didn't hit the genre at all. Like, you saw the cover and it didn't fit with, you wouldn't look at it and think, psychological thriller whatsoever, because I didn't know the importance of a cover that people could look at and say, oh, this is just like Girl on, Gone Girl or whatever, like, oh, this is just like Good Girl, I had terrible covers initially, not terrible in the sense that they were done poorly, or that they weren't beautiful. They just didn't hit what they needed to hit. So then when it came to Phantom Limb, so when it was time to launch Phantom Limb, I did it very, very differently. I didn't want to launch Phantom Limb until I had, because at the same time that I launched Phantom Limb, I put Appetite for Innocence on pre-order. And so I wanted to make sure I had both of those ready to go at the same time. I had advanced reviews copies for Phantom Limb that I sent out, and for that, it was like I sent out like thousands of queries to people, just to get a couple hundred responses, and then of those couple hundred responses, you get a handful of people that actually do it. But making sure I had good, solid, that my first like 6 to 8 reviews were like good, solid reviews from like real like reviewers that were thorough and good, was really important. So yeah, I had definitely a strategic plan when it came time for Phantom Limb, and it did well. It hit it out of the park sort of from the get-go and just kept rolling.
Yeah, and that's the thing that you actually then the Thomas and Mercer approached you, which is sort of kind of unheard of well, nowadays. In the last couple of years at least. So that's kind of speaks volumes as to how well your books are doing and how good they are. That yeah. Were you when they first approached you? Were you kind of like, is this were you thinking about it or? Well,
actually, so how I sort of got on Amazon's radar was that so I released Phantom Limb, and it did really well. Was getting a lot of sales, a lot of good reviews, a lot of hype about the book, and about I think it was right about the time that Appetite launched. That did well as well. So it was right like probably May or June, actually. Amazon Publishing contacted me then, and they contacted me through their imprint of Kindle Press, which normally does the Kindle Scout campaign. But they're moving. Kindle Press is changing things up with that imprint as far as who they're going to be within the Amazon Publishing domain. So Kindle Press contacted me about Phantom Limb, and we had some discussions, and Kindle Press wanted to relaunch Phantom Limb under their imprint Kindle Press. So we had lots of discussions. So that's how I initially came under their radar, was through Kindle Press. And then that just started discussions with with them and their editors and stuff. And then when they launched Phantom Limb, it did really well as well. That's when Thomas and Mercer contacted me, one of their acquisitions editors. So
that's interesting about Kindle Press. I had no idea that. I always thought that they just published the Kindle Scout stuff. I didn't realize that they did other.
No, they're shifting into a different model. So I think there will be more changes like that as well. And yeah, I had no idea. I'd never even heard of Kindle Press. I didn't even know what Kindle, like, it was actually when they had first they had emailed me, and I was like, Kindle Press, like, who's that? And at first I thought it was like just spam or like super scammy, like some scam artist, because it's like, Amazon, we're interested in you. And I was like, huh? Then when I Googled Kindle Press, I was like, wait a minute, these guys do Kindle Scout. And so then initially when I emailed them back, I was like, I think you made a mistake. Like, I'm not in Kindle, like, Scout or whatever, So it was actually funny. Like, then I thought it was a mistake. I was like, no, I'm not one of your, like, Scout. And they're like, no, we know that. We're aware of that. We know who you are. We are Amazon. So, yeah, I didn't know it. I didn't know either.
Oh, that's funny. And how long does it take from, like, when they first approach you to actually, is it a lot of back and forth?
I think, Kindle Press was not a ton of back and forth. I mean, it was a little bit, but Thomas and Mercer, I had a lot of discussions because with Kindle Press, it was just for Phantom Limb and the relaunching of that. And Thomas and Mercer felt like a much more serious career move. So I wanted to be sure that things were exactly how I wanted them, and that I was, that they were going to be able to do more for me than I could do for myself. And I just, it felt like a much bigger career move than when I was just talking with Kindle Press. So yeah, there was quite a bit of back and forth.
I think it's so cool how things have changed in the publishing industry the last few years. I mean, like you said, you want to make sure that they could do things for you that you couldn't do for yourself. I mean, that probably would have been unheard of for an author 5-10 years ago.
Right. Well, and I also think that I also think, I think we used to also be so eager to just have anyone interested in our work that we would, oh yes, please, but now that we have more, and because there's been so many indies that are so successful, like there's so many of them, that I think we have a lot more control and say over what's going to be the best move for us.
And are you still working as a psychologist? Are you like?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, interesting. And when's your new work in progress coming out? You said it's coming out in 2018.
Yes. So my next one should probably, if all goes well, it'll probably be like April of 2018.
Oh, exciting! And do you still find time to read, or are you just too busy now?
No, I do. I mean, I still, I do. I'm very busy, but I don't sleep much, so I do. I still read. And actually, when I finish like a round of revisions or a rough draft, like I'll put it away for like at least a week or two, and I do it, and then I gobble up a ton of reading and mindless TV during that time, just to rest my own creative side of my brain before I look at it again.
Kind of like a recovering time.
Right, exactly.
Okay, well, I'm not going to take too much more of your time, Lucinda, but where can the readers find you? You have your website. You said you have a newsletter as well?
I do, but probably the best place to find me is just on Facebook at Lucinda Berry.
Okay, and I'll have links to that on the website for the listeners. But if you just search on Facebook, Lucinda Berry, you should be able to.
Yes, you should be able to find me, or you can, if you're interested in my books, you can just go to my author page on Amazon, and they're all there as well.
Okay, and then is there anything else you'd like to say to the readers, the listeners, before I let you go?
Just keep plugging away and do what's best for you.
Yeah, I think that's so refreshing to hear, because it's kind of like you said, what we've been talking about before. It's you've done things very differently, and it's very refreshing to see your success. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good thing about the world we live in today, is like there's not just one path anymore.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Alan.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Meet the Thriller Author. I'd like to ask you to please review and rate this podcast over on iTunes. It really helps me get the word out. If you take a few seconds of your time to do that, it would be much appreciated. You can also visit my website at thrillingreads.com/podcast for show notes on this episode, as well as information about the podcast in general. And you can also sign up for my mailing list there. You'll be getting special offers from our guests, as well as information, behind the scenes information on the podcast. And please do visit my author website at alanpeterson.com. I appreciate your support. And so until next episode, I will talk to you then.